an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Of Dawn and Darkness, C, Book 2 of the Elder Empire series, Chapter 15, 16, and 17. In these chapters, we finally get to see Lucan's death, but it's not actually from Calder's perspective, so I am still waiting to see how he feels inside of his head. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you again to George for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, I was really expecting that when we saw Lucan killed by Jyrene, that we would be in Calder's head. And it makes a lot of sense, thinking about it now, that we wouldn't be in his head because Jyrene is giving us some of her reasoning as to why. Not that writing it without telling us wouldn't also be interesting, because that would keep me wondering, when are we going to find out why she did that? But, you know, when we're inside her head, we get to see just how absolutely certain she is that this is what she's meant to do. And what I think is sort of remarkable about Jyrene, and this isn't even necessarily hypocrisy, it may just be that she likes it. But she says something to Calder about how he's been dancing to an elder tune for his whole life. And then everything that she has done in the past few chapters has been down to her deciding this is what Kellerak wants. So she is also dancing to an elder tune. I think it's just that she's okay with that. She's, you know, like, she feels that's what they should be doing. So rather than just being in denial about it, the way that Calder is, she has chosen to accept it and try and work with an elder instead of pretending to fight and being shuffled around at their whim anyway. And it's the kind of thing where I'm like, okay, I guess if that makes you feel like you have more control over the situation, then fine. You know, like, do what you want. There comes a point where I'm not going to be able to convince a person. And none of this is provable. That's what it comes down to in its faith. All of it comes down to, what do they believe and think is happening? And what evidence do they have to support it? And often the evidence is simply circumstantial and or I feel like it is. This is my feeling. I know. And I put "know" in quotes because they don't know, but they think they know. And this applies not only because I know there is a tendency to sort of mock people who have religious faith, especially these days, in a way that can feel really like aggressive and dismissive. And I completely understand the impulse to do that because so many people in the world have been permanently scarred by religious institutions and have been raised in like abusive situations or suffered abuse at the hands of people who were meant to be representatives of these, you know, institutions. So I am not trying to say that it's an inherently bad thing to be like, oh boy, they are one of those types. However, I do think that there's been a weird sort of like, it's almost like some people that I see out in the wild are doing this thing where they're immediately jumping to, if anybody says like, oh, it looks like this was meant to be, you'll see a comment in response that's like, meant to be, meant by who? Some sky god that's in a fairy tale, and they just like jump down a person's throat. And first of all, they didn't even mention God, but okay. And second of all, why are you doing this? It's like, just stop. It's fine. People believe different things. So I try really hard to keep in mind a lot of the situations with religions are not about the logic. They are about people needing comfort and needing something that feels like it's making sense of the chaos around them, that reinforces a sense of there's a purpose to all of this. And it's just helpful to like mental health. All of us, I think, would like to believe that there's meaning to the way we live. And with Jyrene, I still understand. I think she's a maniac. At this point, I have kind of lost all my patience with her. But I do understand that if she's going to talk about dancing to an elder tune, and she's going to be sort of derisive about it with one person, that doesn't mean that she's derisive about the elder tune itself. It's that she's derisive of their denial. That said, I truly, in her POV, still don't really know why she thinks this is the way to go. And I'm not sure if I meant to get it or if it's supposed to be a little bit shadowed until later on. But it feels like she just sees that Calder is associated with Shara and is like, oh, okay, I've got to do this because of his link to her. And I don't know, it felt a little thin to me. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it is so thin that that's a major part of why Calder is so disgusted with her later. But overall, it really looks like I had been holding on to a very faint, not even real hope, just a sort of idea that maybe things with Lucan weren't exactly as they appeared. Either he wasn't dead or not entirely dead. He's mostly dead. It looks like he's just dead. And I guess I'm going to have to let that go. And the fact that it sounds like she pure did that because he's an ally to Shara. And the only reason that she thinks Shara is somebody who is against the elders is because Calder said, I just want Jyrene to have slightly more critical thinking skills. But that's the thing when you worship beings. You aren't allowed to be critical of what they directly tell you. Like, even those of us who don't profess to be of any particular religion, I think if we were in a situation like Jyrene is here, forgive me, I'm going to adjust my seat here because I am uncomfortable. But I think that if we were in a situation where we were like magically transported somewhere and we're sitting in a weird enclosure with what seems to be either like a god or an angel, and they tell us something, I think the vast majority of us probably would take it on faith because it wouldn't be something that we had seen before. And we wouldn't really feel like there's a reason to doubt. That said, Jyrene lives in a world surrounded by magic and surrounded by beings of unknowable horror. So our seeing something like this is a very different scene than when she does. And I just really want her to like take a moment and sort of go, okay, is this really like, why am I listening? But she's not gonna, because this guy has made it clear that she is to do what he says in his defense always, and she's just going to listen. I'm just sad. I wanted his death to mean more. I think that's what's fundamentally bumming me out. And I don't mean this as a criticism of the writing at all. I mean this as just sort of a reflection of how we all feel in general. There are some deaths that feel more worthy than others. And, you know, people, when they say like, what a waste, usually it's about somebody who died accidentally. There was something, you know, that they couldn't have controlled. But Lucan gets killed because of his associate being the threat. Not even necessarily, it's not even really about him, you know? And that I find so insulting, The idea of being collateral damage to taking down another person, I would be so disgusted, you know? This is something I've said already about the clash between Jyrene and, is it Jyrene? And they have their weapons out and they like clash against one another, and a bunch of consultants just drop dead because the energy that explodes outward is pure death energy and destruction energy, and they can't withstand it. And they don't die because they were fighting valiantly in a battle. They die because they were side effects of weapons, not even like a side effect of a major attack. It's a totally separate from them fight. And this is just, I'm just saying, this kind of death is going around, and I, for one, I like to think my death won't be like this, but what if it is? Guys, if I die and it turns out to just be like, I wasn't even like the point, you know, for example, I get shot because somebody was aiming for someone else and I just happened to like be in the way, or their aim was bad or whatever. I want somebody to say in my eulogy, I want them to acknowledge that this is the exact way I didn't want to go. I want them to be like, she will be very angry about this. So whoever did this, watch your back, because she's coming for you. And that's a very real threat. I will come back, and I will fucking harry whoever did it if they're still alive. And if they're not, even better. It's easier. I don't even have to come back. Anyway, okay. Let's start chapter 15, shall we? We are at the arena, and the first sentence, there's no excerpt starting this chapter, I should mention. The first sentence is, eventually the arena killed everyone. And we get a description of the Assyrian arena and the way that it functions and the hopelessness of being sent there to like live out a sentence. You're not getting out of there. The overall message is, good luck with that. And then they walk away laughing with handfuls of gold while you probably bleed out on the sand. The emperor himself, as the story went, gave into the tradition of ancient Assyrian tribes by dueling them one by one for their support. Here, that story was told to reinforce one simple point. Even the emperor bowed to the rules of the ring. I really like that. And I assume it's true, because the emperor has no reason to not just fight bitches. I mean, what has he got to worry about? There's nobody that's beating him. And if this is their tradition and they demand this in order to listen, 100%. I'm just going to assume that's totally true. When Uzziah was condemned to the arena to die, they couldn't just lop off his head and be done with it. There were procedures to follow, spectators to satisfy. Fathers who couldn't feed their children bought tickets to the fights and roared more loudly than the rest. As long as they were happy, the arena's administrators made money. The more money the administrators made, the more trickled down to the patrons whose fighters cut and bled on the sand. It was in everybody's best interest to keep the drunken, unruly mob in the stands happy. And Uzziah did. So several things here. One, just the mention of the fact that these guys can't feed their family, but they'll still spend money on tickets, which is such a bummer. Secondly, the trickle-down theory being brought up, and apparently here it works. And I can buy that it would work on a microcosm. You know, in the tiny economy of the arena only, that makes some sense, because you've got expectations historically that have worked a certain way. And a very small group of very loud people in charge of certain things that would make it known if you weren't upholding whatever traditions had led to the current laws. But the moment that I saw the money trickled down, I was like, ooh, did it? I expected this to be sort of undermined. No, it's just what it looks like. And we get this amazing scene of Uzziah. He is soulbound here to a gold-scaled hide wrapped around his left arm. If anyone was looking for a vessel, their eyes would first turn to his hatchets, his gauntlets, or perhaps his ornate belt buckle carved in the image of a snake eating its own tail. His captors had delivered his vessel to him only after ensuring he was wrapped in invested chains. That was another rule of the arena. The fighter had to walk onto the sands at his best. So, Urziah essentially is the crowd favorite. He is here, and he has been for how many years at this point? 3 years. And he is completely unbeaten. It's not even a contest. Like, he's out here just wanting to see what kind of cool new shit they're going to come up for him. Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. What kind of cool new shit they will be coming up with for him. Thank you. Every time he fights. And apparently it's once every 3 days. It is not every day. He gets the chance to rest, excluding emergencies and imperial holidays. His life was the wager without exception. The emperor's command insisted that he die on the sands. He had defied that command for 3 years. So he comes out to, in this particular scene, meet the fighter that he's going up against, who I think is called the Houndsman. We get like his big announcement later on. And Urziah sees that it's one guy. And he's wondering what the deal is here, because they have been pitting him against groups mostly. So he thinks immediately, this dude must be pretty badass. If he's being set against me by himself, we're about to have a real fight. And he's pretty excited about it. And he goes by the name Woodsman. So, yeah, here it is. Houndmaster. That's the name of the other guy. And the crowd, when Urziah gets introduced, they are completely elated, totally on his side. Houndmaster gets introduced, and people sort of... It's not like necessarily that they boo. It's more that they just aren't as excited. They don't know this guy, and whatever, you know? And as soon as he hears the tamer of beasts, the victor of 100 contests under Patron Gametti, the man who is a full team unto himself, Houndmaster, Urziah thinks, oh, this guy is going to have a bunch of dogs or chimera or something. I thought I was just going to get to fight I thought I was like a real fight. And now we're just going to do some other gimmicky shit again. And for a moment thinks, well, maybe they're invisible. And he's like, that would be kind of dope. And he just like whips his weapon around to see, and nothing is there, which I don't know why I found that so funny. But the mere idea of being so completely convinced of your own victory that every single additional factor that gets laid onto the contingents of like the current fight being a pro. If they told him, Urziah, we're going to tie one of your arms behind your back, I think Urziah would be fucking delighted. Most people are going to be like, you're going to what? And it would be panic. Urziah, I just feel like he would go, all right, now we're talking. Let's fucking do it. Like, he just wants something to keep him interested at this point. 3 years, every third day, every single guy he's gone up against is dead. That is... I mean, it's not like he isn't still having a good time, but there's an element of boredom here. So, the Houndmaster pulls out a sickle and a yellow horn. He stood back and let the Houndmaster blow his horn. The man was an experienced fighter, so he would certainly have a way to counter a straightforward strike. Besides, Urziah wanted to see what the horn could do. The sand shimmered with heat, and seconds after the cry of the Houndmaster's horn, the sand began to swirl. it gathered into 4 densely packed shapes, each the detailed outline of a hunting dog. Urziah spotted individual teeth and snarls of unruly fur, all sculpted on bodies of packed sand. The sandhounds bared their teeth at Urziah and snapped their jaws open in a bark, but they made no sound. Still, they looked so realistic that Urziah practically heard their growls and cries in his head. He whistled, impressed. This Houndmaster was a soulbound, obviously, and his vessel must be the horn from some chimera that controlled sand. Sloppy of him to reveal it so clearly, but at least the man had a flair for the dramatic. The Houndmaster snapped a command, and all 4 dogs sprinted toward Urziah. He leveled his axes, still smiling. If this was going to be his last fight, he wanted to give the crowd a good show. Just because this was a death sentence didn't mean he couldn't milk a little joy out of it while he lasted. Eventually, the arena killed everyone. And then we cut to Calder and Jerry, who are up in the stands. And I found this interesting. They are visiting, but they are not here to break him out quite yet. I thought for sure that the next time they arrived, if they were in the audience, that this meant we're go for launch. Here we are, we're about to carry out our mission, which is to take this guy, and there would be no reason for them to be here otherwise. But it turns out that they are genuinely here to watch the show, and Calder doesn't even want Urziah to see him because he isn't going to be able to get him out yet, and he doesn't want he doesn't want his hopes to get up. And I think it would be very interesting if Calder heard like Urziah's internal monologue and realized that Urziah is not necessarily suffering the way Calder probably thinks he is. So Calder looked at the outer edge of the arena. The whole building was constructed like a yellow stone bowl, with seats in rising tiers up the sides of the bowl and a flat plane on top. And they're casing basically what the security is like, what the building itself, how it's built, because there's bars, cage-like sort of areas, just places that they're not going to be able to get through, which is what leads him to needing something explosive a little bit later on. And Calder is looking at also like the different patrons and stuff who are, of course, making money off of this. So they are going to very violently protest to anybody trying to fuck with their people. And they're looking at the people who are up in boxes. There's like a magister up there, arena administrators. And he's like, do you think that they have their own exit to get out of the box up there? And Jerry is like, I've got to imagine that they're not going to be down with the rabble just trying to like squeeze out the same door as the rest of them. So Calder is like, all right, maybe we can get up there. And then I doubt we could take a gladiator straight up from the arena, up through the common seats, into the box, and past the arena's guards. And honestly, this is the part that I'm the most interested in. I mean, they can just blow a hole in the wall. And I think that's likely what's going to happen based on his encounter with Petal and all of that. But if they were going to try and do something that was more heisty, I say more heisty, but is that fair? That's sort of implying that just blowing a hole in the wall and taking shit isn't a heist. And I think that may not be true. I think that might also be just as heisty. But I guess what I'm saying is more blatant and obvious. If they're going to do something that isn't as blatant and obvious and try and disguise themselves or play roles, I don't know. I just don't see it. I think, based on what we know about how he and Jyrene function, especially at this point in their lives, we have seen them attempt to like pull off disguises before. Calder isn't as flawless at thinking on his feet as he might need to be. And probably busting out and kind of being direct is the best way to go for them. So, let's see. The crowd of an arena was a totally different species from the audience in an opera house or theater. Pushing down a row was more like forcing his way through a mob. No one was seated. Most people were shouting and waving their arms around as though to imitate the fighters. One woman smacked Calder so hard with her elbow that his head rang, and she followed it up by screaming in his ear and shoving him farther down the row. Which, I cannot imagine. I don't think I've ever been in a crowd with that kind of energy before, and I don't know. It's 2022. Shit's getting pretty bad. I figure it's on the horizon for me eventually, but it doesn't sound pleasant. I'll say that. Calder shot a glance at the guards in their towers, hoping they wouldn't react, and pulled his pistol from his jacket. He held it overhead like a banner as he advanced. The crowd glared at him, and a few even spat at his feet, but at least no one pushed him anymore. Finally, clear of the press of bodies, he took a deep breath and immediately wished he hadn't. So here he has a little bit of like internal debate with himself about the concept of civilization and the way that it feels uncivilized to have this sort of thing, but also maybe people would say this is the most civilized way to do it because you're keeping it contained and it's not just people busting out on the street, letting their rage out. It's, you know, we're giving them an outlet, but it's something that's a lot more controlled. And I find that really interesting because I can see that argument and I'm not even totally like, I don't even totally disagree with it. It's just the fact, first of all, obviously, nobody here is here because they're consenting. They're all here because they are on death sentences, and their deaths are being, like, used as entertainment. Which, you know, however, the concept of just having, like, a place where people can let this kind of steam off in controlled surroundings, I see the value of that, and I can understand how it would turn into something with sports or boxing, which is a sport, but you know what I'm saying? Just like, I'm talking about like team sports versus one-on-one kind of combat sports. But anyway, yeah, I just thought that was a neat little aside and that he made some good points to himself, and the idea that he's debating the philosophy of this in his mind as he's doing something completely unrelated felt very relatable to me because I sort of do this also. I'll be in the midst of like an errand and I'll step back from it mentally and think about the implications of what I'm doing in the current society in a way that's, I won't say it's like unhealthy, but it's certainly an aspect of the fact that I overthink a lot of things. Anyway, so he gets to the square platform and he is like just seeing how it's set up and what it looks like. Calder tucked his pistol back into his jacket and unfolded his piece of paper and a stub of paper-wrapped charcoal. He made a quick, crude note of the exit positions. If they could get Urziah up to this platform, they would have a straight run out of the arena. So this is when people begin to roar and he turns around. And Urziah is holding aloft one of his hatchets. And the man, his corpse is like pinned to it in the air. And like this dude, I mean, I have to imagine he has to weigh at least a couple 100 pounds. And Urziah is like overhead pressing him with one arm like it's nothing. And I have to admit, at this point, I have a picture in my head of what Urziah looks like, and it is the guy who played the Mountain on the later one. Bjorn something, I think is the actor's name. He's the guy that I've got in my head for Urziah. And I just like to make a note of what my mental images are for different characters, because I don't have a mental image for everyone. You know, I honestly don't really have a great picture of what Calder looks like in my head. I have to be reminded that he has red hair because I don't remember that. So anyway, Urziah has sustained some injuries on his face, and Calder is like, man, if I had gotten here sooner, maybe this wouldn't have happened to him. The man showed more scars than armor, and several deep wounds showed that he'd have new scars when he next entered the arena. If Calder had been faster, perhaps he could have helped Urziah leave whole. And again, I don't know that Urziah would want that. I feel like getting to do this for a few years might actually be just what he wants. It just seems like he's having a great time, you know? So Urziah comes out like right near where Calder is standing as he leaves the arena. And people are like crowding around to watch him, and Calder is sort of hiding back, hoping that Urziah won't spot him. And the crier begins to talk to Urziah about, like, you know, generally how the fight went. How are you feeling? Do you like to take lives? And Urziah says, a man once promised to return my freedom. I must live so I can collect on that promise. And while I wait, I might as well have some fun. And Calder feels so guilty and sad. And I also have to imagine that he doesn't love the fact that Urziah is publicly declaring that somebody has said they're going to break me out of the joint, because that feels like it's giving something away. But I also don't really believe that anybody who's listening to this is going to take him seriously. Urziah, that is. But the crowd fucking loves it, you know, so who knows? So that's the end of chapter 16. And then we go to present day, and Calder saying somebody is in there. And this is the scene that we have seen already, with all of them running in, Lucan getting the drop on them, and the back and forth between Calder and Lucan regarding the way he's handling this and the fact that he hasn't just slit their throats. But before they got, Calder is theorizing who it might be. And he says immediately it's consultants. They killed Maxius a couple of days ago, and now they're working up the ladder. And Foster basically is like, working up the ladder? You think that you're up the ladder? All right, bud. Sure. Definitely. He is so everybody is so disdainful of Calder. I don't know how he takes it. It would eat my soul. It would truly just wear away my will to live. Like, how do you... I have a lot of pride. I'll just say that. I am a prideful bitch. And this sort of treatment, it would really kill me. Genuinely. So anyway, he says something, he quotes Antarius, humility is the death knell of the soul. Andal says, Loralee has some views of her own on the matter. Humility is the perfection that we should always seek out, but can never truly achieve. And when Calder is like, well, you're a Luminian, Andal, of course you're going to think that she's right. Andal says, are you, like, on bad terms with the Regent? Which makes Calder sort of stop and go, oh my god, yeah, she's alive still. Like, I think of her as somebody who is, a dead philosopher who just left a legacy behind, but she's fucking out here talking about shit still. And he thinks about how she doesn't want another emperor. What did that say about what Calder was doing? So he just sort of sidesteps that, does not continue on that train of thought. They've got shit going on, understandably. And this captain has walked up to them and been like, we are supposed to take you to another location. If we think that the place has been infiltrated, we got to get you out of here. And Calder is like, okay, I get it, but also I'm not doing that. I'm in the clothes I normally wear. I'm with he says friends, and Foster coughs, and he says colleagues. And I was like, that is cold-blooded, Foster, truly. And I'll handle this the way I usually would. Foolishly, Andal said. I would have said bravely. I'm sure you would have, sir. Oh my God. If it weren't for these people, I can't imagine the ego Calder would have. They are constantly cutting him down to size, and maybe that's necessary. Who knows what kind of monster he'd be if it weren't for being surrounded by folks who are like, yeah, no, nah. There is a friend of mine, a listener actually, named Cindy. She gave me this deck of like daily inspiration cards called Spiritual as Fuck. And it's a deck where you like pull one that's supposed to be a theme for the day. And it has a little holder so that you can put the cards out. Oops, sorry. You can put the card out like standing up. And I've recently been trying to pull one every day to just see what they say. And this feels incredibly relevant today with Calder, actually. On the front, it says, courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same. That's why life is hard. And then on the back, what is the difference between courage and stupidity in your life? A big part of adulting is not crossing the lines where your rebelliousness turns into recklessness. The people who ride this line most gracefully usually have a clear eye on their values and a good friend or two who will tell them when they're being a dumbass. If you can't decide if you're being brave or stupid, call a friend. Hint, don't call a dumbass friend, though. So anyway, what I'm saying is that maybe Calder has a little bit of difficulty determining which is which, and it's great that he is surrounded by people who are going to be like, fucking nah. Look, we'll go ahead and do this thing with you, but we're not going to pretend it's a great idea. We're not going to like act like you have everything in hand. We know you, bud. It's not like that. So he's in the middle of arguing with this guard who's still trying to like convince him, and all of a sudden the doors just like crumple, and Calder is watching it, and the doors begin to roll toward them, and they have to dive out of the way. And I had like forgotten about how this goes. So they get grabbed up. They're fast, but it's not fast enough, even though he's out of practice. Lucan is still too much for them. And he does the floor turning into waves sort of moment. And Calder, I was interested to see how impressed he is by the fact that Lucan can do this. Because, you know, I don't really have a great amount of perspective of what's possible and what's considered gifted or ordinary reader abilities. I'm sort of like Shara. She's been described as believing readers can do basically anything, and that's sort of my vibe also. So it's helpful to be in Calder's head, who is also like a pretty great reader, and have him go, he's doing what? And have that happen like more than once. He's constantly impressed by Lucan's performance here. And they get tied, and he's telling Lucan, that's this kind of you. This is when Lucan says, I try to make sure they deserve it. And then he has that moment where he says something about like quoting Sedesthenes, and Lucan is like, oh, you're assuming I haven't read him already. And I really like being in Calder's head and seeing how excited he is at the prospect that maybe Lucan has read something where they can find common ground. Because I didn't really know what like Calder was thinking in this moment when Lucan said, oh, maybe I read him already. And I almost wondered if maybe Calder would be irritated by it, because sometimes when people who are academics are trying to put someone in their place and make them feel inept, they will quote things in order to throw somebody off and make them, just sort of argue theory rather than the actual situation at hand, or it's just a distraction. But seeing that Calder says this and then is like actually excited that maybe Lucan has read it, it made me feel like Calder's use of quotes and everything is very pure. And I've already gotten that from his POV in a lot of other ways. But seeing it in action with an enemy at this moment, it just feels like this is a particularly good representation of how he probably really feels. And it seems like he genuinely is like, oh, really? Did you read it? And then when Lucan is like, nah, Calder's like, oh, okay. So then we have the moment where Lucan is saying, well, Calder says, you must be very good. If you were working for the Emperor when you were that young. And Lucan says, I am. And it follows, if Calder wanted to get anything out of this consultant, he had to puncture his pride. And yet we noticed you sneaking around, he pointed out. Out of what Calder could only imagine was petty spite, Lucan didn't respond. I love seeing that from this perspective because Lucan, in his POV, thinks about how that stings. He is genuinely a little bummed. But I wasn't sure if it showed on his face. I don't really know what kind of control he has. So being in Calder's POV and seeing that he can't really get a reaction out of him, I was sort of proud. I was like, all right, Lucan, he's got control of his facial features. Like, that is not something that I excel at. Let's just say that. I think that's part of my charm, especially in live performances. I have a very expressive face. This is it. This is the face all the time. And I have really extreme reactions to stuff. And it's like, I don't really see the point in not sharing how I feel. But that's because I'm not in a position where people knowing how I feel could be used against me. It's just helpful for my job. So I do it, and it winds up just leaking into... I was going to say, because I do it for work, it leaks into my everyday, but that's not true. It's how I am every day, and thus it makes my work better, I think. But if you're in a situation that's political, keeping it under wraps is super advantageous, and it's part of why I would not have excelled at a job like that. Anything where you have to keep as much information to yourself as you can in order to retain advantage, I am not good at any of the keepings of information from people. I always want to over-explain things. I always want to have extended conversations where I like try and make my point. And I am really bad about like sharing secrets and stuff. And it's not in a way of betraying friends or anything, but in a way of like, I don't stop and think maybe they don't want this person to know about this because XYZ. It won't occur to me that I'm maybe supposed to have told everybody but that person. And I have been known to like blurt shit out at jobs I've had and get people in trouble without intending to, because I'm just trying to put all the cards on the table with whoever it is I'm talking to. So yeah, I am not awesome with this, and thus I would be a super bad consultant. I might be a good shepherd. Is it or is it the mace? Which one's the one where you like pretend to be different people? I feel like I could pull that off fairly well, because like engaging in a character is different. But even that, I don't know if I would be able to still keep shit secret. I don't know. So they finally he gets, his captain comes in again, lets him out, and he is like, I don't understand, Lucan. Why are you still standing here? We're getting let out. The guards are here, and you're just standing and watching. And Lucan he says, I wanted to have a word with the guild head. And Calder is just like, you really don't think I'm in charge? And this is when Lucan just jabs him and is like, no, come on. No, you're not. And Calder is like, okay, fine. Yeah, I'm not. He's so annoyed. He just really feels like Lucan read him for filth a little bit. So he has this moment. Lucan's gaze was calm, and Calder caught a brief impression of the man's intent. He was absolutely at peace, ready to die so long as he accomplished his mission. Calder shivered. And while I know that's what Lucan was like in his POV, hearing it secondhand is different and does make him feel so much more threatening. Like, it's one thing to know that the guy whose POV you're currently reading is a threat. You can know he's a good fighter, that he's been trained, yada, yada, yada. But I forget what other people are going to be getting off of him, especially in a situation where you can read somebody and their intent. And it's gotta be extremely unnerving to be up against an enemy who seems to genuinely not care if they live or die, as long as they get the mission completed. Like, having that kind of indifference towards your own life is a huge advantage in that kind of job, and nobody wants an enemy to feel that way. So this is when Lucan says that they have to destroy it. And he is genuinely surprised because he is thinking that they're going to want to, like, take it over. And it says Lucan could easily be lying, but the timing was too good. Jerry had spent significant effort trying to persuade him to sit on the Aptasia, and all the guild heads seemed to agree. The only argument he had against it was a vague unease, along with a desire to prove he wasn't dancing to some elder's tune. Now it seemed like the consultant was offering him exactly what he wanted. So he is, like, deciding that he's going to need to find out more about the Aptasia and what's going on here. And there comes a point later where he is reminded that Calder and Jyrene know each other and almost thinks for a moment that they might be working together. And then he's like, no, their objectives are exactly opposite. And I am not getting the vibe at all that Lucan is, like, of the mind that Jyrene is. He is not an elder worshiper. So, yeah, he asks Lucan, do you understand what it does? And Lucan tells him. And Calder is just like, God damn, that is truly insane. The man was so powerful already, and he had access to this. And he thinks to himself and says out loud that, like, probably this was a major weapon that the Emperor used all the time. And when Lucan is like, he didn't use it, it's he what he says is he sealed it away. Rumor has it he even employed watchers to make sure he never used it, and if he did, to kill him if it drove him insane. And Calder is like, okay, that's some horseshit. But then when he asks Lucan, are you for real that he never used it? And Lucan is like, he used it twice, and he has this vibe rolling off of him that's like deep regret. Calder's thinking, oh, wow, maybe he is telling the truth. And if that felt like it was too dangerous for the fucking Emperor, I gotta assume that's a really bad sign. And Lucan asks him, have you tried reading it? And this is the little exchange with Kellerak. He was confused at first and then suspicious, not the reaction of someone who had met Kellerak before. It was good to be sure. And it turns out when Calder says, haven't you read Fisher's treatment of the Aeon Sea? That Calder made up that book on the spot, and that's not a real thing. I had really taken it in that scene as like genuine, oh yeah, Kellerak's been described before, but this is just Calder covering his ass. And Lucan is like, I mean, if you want to read it, go ahead, but honestly, if you do that, you're just throwing yourself into the mouth of one of these monsters. You may as well. And Calder kind of goes cold, realizing what Lucan is saying versus how Jerry just wanted him to go sit in it. And there's an assumption here that Jerry is trying to either completely sabotage him or outright kill him or just doesn't care about him. And this is when, like, Lucan later, he says something about it will core you out and put whatever it wants in your place. I have to assume that Calder thinks Jyrene would be fine with him being replaced by something else, with himself being puppeted, because she doesn't care. I don't think Jyrene understands the danger of this. I'm going to call it a weapon. It is. I don't think she gets it. So I understand why Calder is so angry at Jyrene. And it's not even unwarranted, because even if she doesn't believe it, she's working without the kind of knowledge that she would need to have to safely recommend that he use it, which she is doing with such complete confidence. So she's being extremely reckless and foolhardy in this, which is 100% her MO. But I really, I do wish that he understood how much of her she's acting in good faith in her way. She's not actually trying to fuck him up. It's just that she has a completely flawed understanding of all of this and is way too confident that she knows what's going on and she knows the dangers of certain things and what's meant to be and what isn't. So this is when they trot her out, and we have in the interim the introduction of Maya to Lucan and their back and forth about what happened and her being sort of embarrassed about everything. And all of a sudden it's the moment where Lucan has a choice between absolutely going ham on everybody or hearing Calder out. And I love this. Lucan pulled his wrists apart, passing through the ropes binding his arms together as though they'd rotted off. Calder couldn't believe his eyes. He wouldn't have been able to tear ropes like that without days of intent and focus, while Lucan had seemingly done so in minutes. Then again, Calder would never have been able to shake the courtyard tiles like an earthquake. So again, a reminder of how great Lucan is at this stuff, which makes him dying so much more frustrating, because I feel like I just didn't get to see everything he could do. And I feel like, what a waste. It's a waste. So Maya convinces him, calms him down, which we have seen already. And the, general, she's part of my crew. No, I'm not. Well, she's a provisional member. No, I'm not. And I had forgotten that Lucan says to Calder, I'm still here because I agree with Maya. Whatever else we do, the guilds can't dance to an elder's tune. And Calder has a moment of being kind of creeped out at how much that aligns with the words that Jerry used. So let's see. Jerry comes in. Calder almost had the chains removed before he reconsidered the anger in her eyes. No, let her wear them. And I had said, when all this goes down, and I was in Lucan's POV, that I did not understand how they allowed her to have her fucking invested, or not even invested, it's her soul-bound vessel, her earring. But the fact that Kellerak gave it back to her, I mean, there's nothing they could have fucking done about that. A great elder stepped in and literally handed her the thing. I just wish that somebody had noticed she was wearing it. That's really the main thing for me, is that if you are, because she didn't have it, I am assuming that is because it was taken into custody. They figured out that it was her vessel. And if Kellerak took it and gave it to her and nobody noticed that it was missing from wherever it had been put, they have to be holding it somewhere, and nobody checked her ears before they left because they're leaving the cell, and you know that she has a particular type of weapon, it just feels like it would be such an easy thing. You don't even need to pat her down. You just lift her hair and look at her ear. This is carelessness, and I'm irritated. So we have the back and forth, which we have seen already, so I won't get too much into this. And then we jump into Jyrene's POV. Let's see. Do you know her well? Lucan's response was absolutely calm. We've worked together. That was confirmation enough for Jerry. She turned to his blonde partner, Maya. How about you? Do you know Shara? I don't believe I'm required to answer you, madam, Maya said, but Jerry knew the truth. Calder had delivered 2 of Shara's closest allies into her hands. I am really curious if that's true. It feels true. I can understand why she believes that this was orchestrated because of the coincidence being astronomical. But is it true? The fact that they took Maya prisoner feels like such a long shot, and she wouldn't be here if she hadn't been snatched up. I genuinely don't know. I really don't. And it makes me frustrated because as a reader, I'm as useless as the characters at determining whether or not the elders are behind everything. So this is when she says, I've been warned about Shara quite recently. However little you know of her, let me assure you, she is the greatest threat to you and to the future of humanity, not any guild. And Calder is like, who warned you? And Jerry doesn't answer him and is just like, she's your enemy. I don't care if you believe me. And whether you believe it or not, I'm your ally. And this is when she attacks Maya. And as we know, that attack is unsuccessful. Jerry's attack tore through the wall of the Emperor's room, leaving a smoldering hole the size of a bullet. And she is failing and is feeling very... She's a... Honestly, now that I think about it, Jerry is weirdly like a teacher's pet, but for elders. She's an elder's pet. So she's really disappointed in herself and the fact that this didn't work. And also knows that this attack means that Calder will never trust her again. She basically betrayed everything. She has her weapon on her when she shouldn't. She's attacking somebody who's allegedly an ally. She is doing this without explaining or warning. And she's basically closing the door on them ever reconciling. And it didn't really occur to me that she would know that's what she was doing in the moment. I kind of felt like she was going to be so overwhelmed at the temptation to attempt this to begin with, feeling like she's justified and her frustration at failing. I didn't really think that the consequences of this in relationship to her marriage were going to be on the top of her mind at all. And they were. And part of me was so annoyed by that because I'm like, you're acting like it matters to you. And I know that it does. And I know that you are a complicated person, but I can't imagine how else you thought this was going to go. Even if you didn't fail, what did you think? Like, it just doesn't think that it doesn't seem like she stopped to think about it before she attempted it, you know? And yeah, I don't know. It just, I want her to stop and consider before any action. And she just never really does. So everybody gathers around her, pushes her to the floor, and this is the moment where she kills Lucan and her vessel crows with triumph. And Calder is staring at her in undisguised horror. Why? Why him? That might be the last chance I get to strike a blow against Shara. I had to make it count. Because she's the greatest threat. Who told you that, Jerry? Who do you think? He nodded as though she'd confirmed his every suspicion, then gestured to the guard nearest the door. An instant later, the door slammed shut, leaving Jerry once again in darkness. So, yeah, they take her earring away, I should mention, but it doesn't seem to matter. If the fucking elder can just show up and take it and put it back in her ear. How do you destroy a soulbound vessel? Like, that's the question. You gotta do it. And I'm not confident that's something that they can do with hers. The feeling of it having come directly from great elders, it seems like it's going to be too powerful. So then we go to chapter 17. And this is when we are in Kenitalia, which I think is the city name. And this is where a lot of the alchemists are gathered. And I think it's just the full alchemist guild is located here. And what it turns out Calder is doing is trying to organize a sort of backdoor deal with the Alchemist Guild where he just pays them a favor later in exchange for them giving him a bomb. And it makes sense that he doesn't really have anything to offer. But honestly, when I realized how little he had to exchange for what he's asking for, I was like, man, you must be really desperate, because you had to know there was no way this was going to work. So this dude who Calder deals with first, he has like those light circles around his eyes from people who are wearing goggles a lot of the time, and they get like, it reminds me of people who use tanning beds a little bit. And the guy assumes that Calder is a charity case at first, which Calder's super annoyed by because he's wearing like nicer clothing and his navigator's jacket, and he really expected to give a good impression of somebody who's got some power, and that did not work. And it's just really remarkable how consistently not taken seriously Calder is. And I'm starting to think, actually, that might be a strength. If everybody doesn't take him seriously, maybe he's going to accomplish exactly what he wants, because nobody is going to think he's anything. And he wants to be taken seriously in a way that, I don't know, maybe that won't help him. I don't know. All I'm saying is, it's embarrassing, and I'm constantly embarrassed on his behalf. So, the alchemist leaned over and inspected Calder's palm before pulling his own glove off and shaking. Calder had known dogs that were more discreet. I love that idea, but it makes sense. There's all kinds of weird stuff in this world, so you're not going to just put your hand out and grab whatever somebody offers you. So, I don't know. Seems fair. And Calder is trying to like be subtle about what it is he's wanting, and he says something about like, I'm trying to take a wall down in my house. No, that won't be necessary. And he's like, okay, well, I don't get what you're looking for. And he assures the guy, the wall I want to take down is a continent away. And this dude is like, I don't know if I can trust that. And if it's not, they will fucking find me. And I will tell you what, I will tell them exactly who you are, exactly what you look like. And I love how he says, I'll tell them your alias. And Calder is like, alias? That would have been a good idea. And I was, again, he uses his real name because he thinks it's going to help his like legitimacy. But what you're asking for is so clearly not on the up and up. There's no need to try and establish legitimacy here, sir. And then the guy is like, I also don't see any money. So if you want to do this, you better have a big bucket of money to pull from. And Calder says, on the matter of payment, I was thinking something less formal. Again, no, guy, Calder. And he's really thinking he's making this guy a good deal. Like, having this kind of favor in your pocket to Calder is a huge advantage. But it's, again, this guy can't trust anything about who Calder says he is or what he can do. And it just sounds like a complete con. I know that Calder's legit. And if this dude knew that too, maybe he would take him slightly more seriously. I don't think so, but maybe. But it sounds fishy as fuck. So the dude turns around and leaves. And this is when Calder thinks that he's like getting attacked by a creature that's in the pile, the dump, essentially. And instead, it is a tiny girl. And it's Petal. And it turns out that she messed up a delivery to the Empire. She did something wrong. I don't think that we get any more detail than that. Just that she fucked up. And they don't want her anymore. They've basically kicked her out, and she is still here making this weird little nest for herself and continuing to do alchemical stuff. But it's just a mess, and it's sad. So, and she has like a desk and all of this stuff where but it's again, the best she can do with stuff that's being like thrown away. And he starts asking her questions about who she is, how much experience she has. The alchemists let me use what they don't need. And when she asks about quick lamps, he's like, yeah, I have some on the ship. Fuse, she asked. Powder. Alpha-Dalius extract. Black amber resin. And as she's saying all of this, he's like, can you write it down? Because I don't actually know. And she's like, no, you know what? I have all of that. I can make you a bomb with all of that. And he's like, okay, wait, I'm sorry. Are you just offering to do this? And then she says, I will do it in exchange for a favor, which is exactly what he's asking. She wants to get away from here. And he thinks she just wants to get away, period. Like she wants him to put her down somewhere and leave her to live out her life in a far corner of the world where she won't be targeted by the Alchemist Guild. But what she actually wants is to stay with him on the ship. Take me with you. I don't want to be here anymore. And this is when he asks her name, and she says Petal. And he asks how old she is, and she says 23. And he is like, I'm sorry, what? Because I think in this scene, he's 19 or maybe 20. Actually, he was 19, so maybe he's like 22 now. If it's been 3 years, and I think the last time we saw him, he was 19. I don't recall. But regardless, she clearly looks like an actual child. And I don't know if that's a result of alchemy or if it's a result of just what she looks like. Some people are like that. But this little moment and the way that they meet and the fact that she's like hiding in a dump, essentially, really tracks for the overall vibe of Petal. Makes sense to me. And her story about just like, oh, I messed up a delivery. I'm very interested to hear more about that because I feel like it's not that simple. But okay, I'm over time as usual. I'm going to wrap up. But thank you, George, again for commissioning this. I hope everybody listening is enjoying the content. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.